Yo, how's it going? Today I'm going to be showing you guys my Twisted Blades Trap Hybrid Rogue setup. This setup has carried me all the way from about level 50 and now I'm about to cross level 80 here in just a moment. And this is the only thing that I've been able to use to survive and deal damage here in the end game. Once I got to World Tier 4 with my Rogue, it was very tough to survive. But once I started throwing the pieces of this build together, it helped out dramatically. I can now sit in like Tier 40 nightmares and just sit right in the middle of groups of enemies and be perfectly fine. So the survivability is there, the crowd control is there, and the damage is there as well. So I'm going to break down everything about this build for you guys, and today I will be streaming all day trying to get to level 100 and making a final push for it. So if you guys have any questions about the build, anything like that, make sure you guys stop on by. Also, I will have drops and the gift to subs mount available here on my channel on Twitch. So if you guys want to check that out, make sure you head on over there. But anyways, let's go ahead and jump on into this build. So the first thing that we're going to go over is just what skills are we using. So obviously we're going to be using Twisted Blades with this. That is going to be our main damaging skill. And then we're going to combine that with Puncture just as our basic in utility. And then for our 4 core skills, we're going to have Shadow Step, Dash, Poison Trap, and Death Trap. So what that's going to look like in our skill tree is we're just going to grab Puncture and then Fundamental Puncture. And then we're going to be moving down into our core skills. So we're going to max out Twisting Blades and then grab Advanced Twisting Blades. Then over here, we're going to grab Sturdy just because we're going to be close to so many enemies. That 12% damage reduction is going to be very nice. And then the big one for our survivability is we're going to heal for a percentage of our maximum life when you critically strike close enemies. And we're going to be stacking our max health. So each critical strike is going to be a big chunk of health. And then Stutter Step. That way we can be moving quicker and getting from group to group and keeping those Twisting Blades spinning around us. So our other skills, obviously, like I said, Shadow Step, and we're going to be grabbing Methodical Shadow Step so we can stun them. We're also going to be utilizing an Aspect with this so we can go ahead and spread that stun to everybody nearby, which is cool. And then we're also going to be grabbing Dash, and then I have +4 for my item. I'm only putting 1 in here. And then I'm grabbing down to Methodical Dash over here. Then we're going to grab Weapon Mastery, Concussive, and then 1 point into Trick Attacks and Rapid Gambits. With Trick Attacks, you're going to be knocking down enemies over and over and over. So if there's just like one enemy who can be CC'd, they're not going to be able to attack you. So that is super, super helpful, just having 1 point in there. And then moving down, we're going to grab Poison Trap and only putting 1 point in there. So we're only getting enhanced Poison Trap over here. This is just utility. And then we're going to be maxing out Exploit and Malice, and then throwing 1 point here into Agile, just so we can have some increased dodge chance and hopefully save us from some big attacks as we're spamming our abilities. And then we're not going to grab anything in our imbuement category with this build. We're going to completely skip that entirely and move down and grab Death Trap and max that out to Supreme Death Trap. And then we're going to grab Innervation so we can keep up our energy and spam more Twisting Blades. Trap Mastery for the critical strike chance. And then we're going to grab 2 into Aftermath just so we can maintain our energy a bit better. You guys are going to be using Death Trap every couple seconds in a big group, sometimes like every second in a big group, so you can always have energy. And then 1 point into Adrenaline Rush, which allows us to get down to Haste, so you guys can have that increased movement speed and getting around, and then also that attack speed when you drop below that 50% max energy. And then our key passive is going to be Exposure. This is going to allow us to go ahead and stun enemies, which is something we're going to be dealing more damage to with our aspects, and then also just be able to spam our traps over and over again. So you guys are going to throw down your poison traps, your death traps, and dealing damage to them. You guys are going to be able to just keep spamming those over and over. Now that we've gone through the skills, I'm going to save the Paragon for the end just because everybody's going to be at a wildly different spot with those, whether you're like level 50 just starting out on this build or you're here closer to level 80 where I'm at. So we're going to go ahead and go over our gear first, and I'm just going to mention like the key passives that I'm really looking for on all my gear, and then obviously all of the aspects. So let's go ahead and start with our helmet. The big things on here is just going to be maximum life. So your helmet, chest piece, pants, and then rings, you're going to want maximum life on. On our Rogue, we don't have any way of like generating barrier, fortify that all these other classes have. So we just need to stack our health and rely on siphoning strikes, just healing us through all those big groups of enemies. So like I said, maximum life is one of the most important stats you can have on this build. But otherwise, just go for like cooldown, your main stat Dex, or any sort of resistances, and DR is going to be your best bet for your passives on a lot of this gear, except for obviously our offensive ones. But on our helmet, I like to just do damaging elite, grants you a barrier. This saves you a lot. Obviously, my roll is pretty bad, so hopefully I can get a better one here in the future. And then moving down to our chest piece, still maximum life, and then basic skills will grant you damage reduction for X amount of seconds. That is very helpful. And then our gloves, I like to run attack speed. Crit chance is the big one on here. Crit chance can only roll on a couple pieces of gear, so having that everywhere and where we can is very important. And then obviously a plus to twisting blades is very important as well. The crit chance and the plus to twisting blades are the two most important ones. And then obviously my imbued skills is not really going to be helping me. I need to find a better pair of gloves here. And then on our pants, more maximum life, and then damage reduction from close is huge, and just overall damage reduction. And also the dodge chance helps us in the process as well. And then here on my pants, I'm going to run the gain the armor whenever you deal a form of damage, stacking up. Also, I forgot to mention here on our gloves, we're going to be using the aspect dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy has a chance to daze them for 2 seconds. This is going to be really good for just preventing enemies from attacking you. That's going to be our big survivability, is just having health and CCing the enemies. And we're actually going to be able to spread this once we get here to our boots with this aspect. So it's a lucky hit. When you hit a crowd-controlled enemy, there's a chance for that crowd control effect to spread to another unaffected enemy. And with the stuns from like Shadow Step, all the dazes that we're doing, none of these enemies are really going to be able to attack you until they become unstoppable. So that's really, really going to help out our survivability. And then here on my boots, movement speed is the big one. And then I also like ranks of dash because that's going to lower our cooldowns with dash just so we can be getting around quicker and increasing our survivability. Otherwise, damage reduction and things like that is going to be your other best bet for the passives. Then moving on over to our jewelry. On our amulets, I just really like the movement speed. Having the base movement speed and also movement speed after killing an elite is just super, super nice. This build is all about just getting from target to target, constantly attacking, constantly stealing life from them when you critically strike, and just always having those twisted blades spinning around you because that's where a lot of your utility is going to come from. And then everything else you can kind of just fill in with what you need. And then on our rings, you're basically going to just want this ring right here, where the passives are crit chance, crit damage, vulnerable damage, and then maximum life. I really wouldn't use any other ring. I would just copy this ring and have 2 of them. Unfortunately, I do not have that yet here on the second one. I'm pretty close, but not quite. But let's go ahead and go over the aspects of our jewelry. So on the amulet, I like to do lucky hit, dealing direct damage to enemies affected by your trap skills, has a chance to make them vulnerable. This is going to be making every single enemy near you vulnerable, which is very huge, big damage bonus. And then on one of our rings, we're going to be using a core skill, critical strike with core skills, increase your attack speed. And then distant enemies have a chance to be stunned for 2 seconds. That's not really the big part, but the big part is you deal 32% increased damage to stunned enemies. Like I said, with the Shadow Step, we're going to be stunning a lot of enemies, and we're also going to have those stun grenades out of our key passive. So you guys can get a lot of extra damage for free out of that aspect right there. But now let's go ahead and move on over to the weapons of this. So on our crossbow, you guys are going to be using a crossbow just because it has that vulnerable damage intrinsic. You're going to be looking for your main stat dex, crit damage, and vulnerable damage as your passives on it. Everything else you kind of just fill in. And then on our crossbow, I like to run the Blade Dancers. So twisting blades orbit around you and they deal the damage. So this is one of our key damage sources. So that's what we're going to be wanting to boost up a lot with this build and why we're going to be putting it on our crossbow. And then on our swords, we're basically going to be wanting the same thing as like our rings and everything else in this game. Your main stat, crit damage, and vulnerable damage. Those are the big 3. So our aspects on these swords are going to be 1 with the increased damage based on your primary resource. We're going to be using Inner Sight with this build. So when Inner Sight is active, you're going to have that 20% going. And then the other one is going to be the increased crit chance against injured enemies, but also while you are healthy, which most of the time with this build, you're going to be at full health. So you're going to have that increased crowd control duration, which once again is going to help your survivability because enemies will not be able to attack you. But then as you guys can see with our gems on our armor, we're going to be using the damage reduction to while control impaired. This is going to buy you guys time to get your shadow steps back in case you get CC'd and you can get out of there. On our weapons, we're going to be running the emeralds where you get crit damage versus vulnerable enemies. So that's just free extra crit damage at all times. And then right now in my jewelry, I've tried a couple different things, but at the moment I'm running skulls just because that increases our base armor, which will then get boosted up by our gain increased armor when you deal any form of damage. I briefly mentioned it, but our specialization with this build will be inner sight. You're going to be proccing this all the time, and it's also a free way of getting all of your energy back in case you happen to proc it on like the last enemy before you move between groups. Just a free way of getting all of that back, and obviously this is just a great option and is honestly the best specialization for your rogue. So now that we're on over to our Paragon boards, I'm going to keep this pretty brief. Like I said, everybody's going to be at a wildly different spot with these, so I'm just going to mention the boards that I'm currently using here at around level 80 and also the couple of glyphs that I have as well. So on our starting board, I like to run the combat glyph just for the increased crit damage, and also critical strikes restore their energy costs, so that way you guys can maintain your twisting blades a bit better. And then we're going to move up and grab the tricks of the trade board, and that way you guys can just alternate spamming your puncture and twisting blades when inner sight is not up, and that way you can be more efficient and deal more damage with those twisting blades. And then in this board, I'm grabbing the exploit glyph. And then from here, I have Deadly Ambush on one board where you deal increased crit damage to enemies affected by your trap skills. And then up here, we're going to have Cheap Shot, so you deal increased damage for each nearby enemy that's crowd controlled. You're going to have that in big groups because you're definitely going to have more than 5 enemies crowd controlled. And then finally, my last board is No Witnesses. This way, our Death Trap deals more damage and just gives us a damage bonus that is essentially going to be active at all times. If you guys want to look at my exact pathing with this Paragon board, I will have a link to the whole build in the description. So if you guys want to check that out, go ahead and go over in there. Yeah, overall, this has been the best build that I've been able to come up with so far in this game. It has just made getting through all of these early half nightmare tiers fantastic. Like I said, before starting this build, I was dying like constantly, and then now I'm running like tier 40s and just sitting in groups of huge enemies and just being perfectly fine. So this build is really going to be able to take you far, and I'm excited to min-max it and get it updated as we go along through our nightmare tiers and I move up towards level 100. This build, you are really going to be needing to pay attention to your cooldowns. There's a lot to keep track of. You need to make sure you always have like a shadow step active in case you get CC'd so you can get out, otherwise dashing through enemies so they take increased crit damage and also just escapability. And then doing your combos with your poison trap, death trap, pulling the right amount of enemies, standing in the middle of them and getting your twisted blades going before like fully jumping in there, and just making sure you are constantly CCing the enemies. So there is a bit to keep track of, but that's the whole point of playing Rogue. It's why I play Rogue, and it's the most fun class to me. It's just, there's a lot to do. It's a very active play style, and why I love it so much. Yeah, like I said, if you guys have any questions about this build or want to see it in action, I'll be running it all day long over on Twitch, and make sure you guys come on by and score your drops. But anyways, hopefully you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like on it and consider subscribing for more Diablo content here on the channel. I want to get to all the characters and also make different sorts of builds for each of the characters. So if you guys are interested in that, hopefully I'll see you back in the future. But anyways, I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you all in the next video. See ya.